I struggled with my old dress, and that's when a millionaire CEO unexpectedly fell for me. Welcome back with a new real shock story. Before we start, comment and tell me which city you're watching from. At the end, don't forget to subscribe and rate it from 0 to 10. Let's enjoy the story, everyone.
I never imagined that a simple day could change everything. That morning started like any other. I woke up before the sun had fully risen, my small apartment dimly lit by the first pale light sneaking through the blinds. I stretched and rubbed my eyes, trying to shake the exhaustion that clung to me. Every day felt like this, working hard, barely scraping by, trying to keep my head above the water. I didn't complain much, not because life was easy, I knew it wasn't, but because complaining wouldn't change anything. I opened my closet, staring at the dress I had planned to wear. It was the only one I had that felt right. Not fancy, not new, just something I could wear without drawing too much attention, something that might make me feel confident for once. But as I picked it up, my heart sank. There was a tiny tear near the seam I hadn't noticed before. My fingers hovered over it, unsure if I should try to fix it or just accept that today might not be perfect. I tried to pull myself together. After all, it was just a dress. I could make it work. I had to. The walk to the hall felt heavier than usual, my bag digging into my shoulder, every step echoing the pressure I carried in my chest. I could feel the eyes of strangers before I even reached the door. Not because they were staring at me specifically, but because in my mind, every glance felt loaded with judgment. I clutched my dress tighter, trying to straighten it, willing the small tear to disappear, willing the world to look away just for a moment. And then it happened. A snag, a loud rip. My stomach dropped as my dress tore across the seam, louder than I thought it would. The room froze for a split second, and in that silence, I felt every eye turn toward me. Whispers began, soft at first, then louder, sharper, slicing through my confidence like knives. I wanted to vanish. I wanted to disappear and never be seen again. And my cheeks burned, my hands shook, and the weight of shame pressed me down until I felt like I might fall to the floor. But then, I noticed him. Across the room, a man in a tailored suit stood apart from the rest, calm, collected, observing me without a hint of mockery. At first, I thought it was impossible, that someone so wealthy, so untouchable, could even notice me, let alone look at me without judging. Yet there he was. His eyes didn't hold laughter or cruelty. They held something else. Curiosity? Surprise? Interest? I couldn't tell. My heart pounded, not from fear alone, but from a strange, electrifying sense of possibility. I tried to pull myself together, adjusting the torn fabric, but the whispers kept coming, growing louder, relentless. I wanted to run. I wanted to hide, but my feet refused to move. The humiliation was suffocating, every second stretching longer, sharper. And through it all, he didn't look away. He didn't smirk or turn his head. He just watched, quietly, patiently, like he understood that I was more than this moment, more than the tear, more than the embarrassment. I had no idea then that this one ordinary, mortifying moment was about to turn into something extraordinary. That the ridicule, the humiliation, and the whispers were not the end of my story, but the beginning of a moment that would change everything. I didn't know how or why, but there was a shift in the air, subtle yet undeniable. Something told me that life was about to pivot in ways I couldn't yet imagine. As I stood there, frozen between shame and anticipation, I felt a strange mixture of fear and hope. The world around me seemed to fade. The people who had been laughing and pointing became distant figures, and all I could see was him. His gaze felt heavy, not oppressive, but magnetic. I didn't know him. I didn't know what he would do next. But for the first time that day, I felt noticed, seen. And that small spark, fragile as it was, gave me a strange kind of courage. I don't remember how long I stood there. Seconds? Minutes? It felt like hours. Every movement, every sound, every whisper was magnified. But his presence anchored me. Then, just as I thought I might finally crumble completely, he stepped forward. Not rushing, not demanding, just moving with a calm, deliberate grace that made everyone else in the room fade into the background. I could hardly breathe. The shift in the room was subtle, yet undeniable. People instinctively turned their attention away from me, as if they too sensed that something significant was happening. And then it happened. A single word, a small gesture, something so simple yet so profound, reached me across the room. It shattered the panic and replaced it with a strange, impossible hope. I couldn't understand it yet. I didn't know what this meant for me or for him. All I knew was that the embarrassment, the shame, the whispers, none of that mattered anymore in that moment. Something had shifted. I realized then that life could be unpredictable, cruel and unfair, but also miraculous, even in the most humiliating circumstances. What seemed like my worst day, my most public failure, could become the turning point I never expected. And in that instant, I felt alive in a way I hadn't felt in years, terrified, exhilarated, and completely aware that the story of this day was just beginning. I couldn't stop wondering, even as my hand still trembled. Could one moment, one small act of recognition from a stranger, really change the course of a life? Could fate be hiding behind humiliation, waiting for the right second to reveal something extraordinary? I didn't know yet, but I had a feeling that everything about this day, the tears, the whispers, the torn dress, and the man in the suit, was about to unfold into something I could never have imagined. I couldn't believe what was happening. The man in the suit, this stranger who seemed untouchable, someone from a world I could never imagine belonging to, was still looking at me, and I was still trembling. My fingers clutched the torn fabric of my dress, but I couldn't pull it together completely. Every nerve in my body screamed embarrassment, yet something in his gaze made me want to stand a little taller. He took another step toward me, slow, deliberate, as if every movement mattered. The room seemed to shrink even more, filled with murmurs and sideways glances, but I barely noticed them anymore. I could only see him. I could only feel the way the air around him seemed different, calm, deliberate, and impossible. And then, without a word, he extended his hand, not in judgment, not in ridicule, but in a way that made my chest ache with disbelief. I froze. My mind raced. Could this really be happening? A simple stranger, a stranger I had never met, reaching out in the middle of my most humiliating moment. My instincts told me to pull back, to hide, to pretend none of this was real. But something inside me, something I hadn't felt in a long time, told me to accept it, to trust, to move forward, even when my heart begged me to run. As our hands touched, something strange happened. The room around me seemed to blur, the whispers fading into nothing, the laughter disappearing. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt seen. Not as a poor girl struggling with a dress, but as a person. A person with hopes, fears, and a life that mattered. I could feel my heartbeat slowing, my breathing steadier. And yet, the tension in my chest remained, because I knew life rarely offered such moments freely. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he just looked at me, really looked at me, and I felt the weight of it. His eyes held questions, curiosity, and something else. Something that made my stomach twist in ways I couldn't describe. Could a single glance carry that much understanding? Could someone truly see beyond the surface face into the fear and hope tangled inside me? For a moment, I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe that this wasn't a cruel trick of fate, that maybe, just maybe, something extraordinary was happening. But the whispers didn't disappear entirely. There were still glances, still judgmental stares from people who didn't understand. I could feel their disbelief, their incredulity, their unspoken questions. Why was he paying attention to her? What could she possibly have to offer someone like him? And yet, the more they stared, the more I felt an odd strength growing inside me. Their judgment didn't define me. Their whispers didn't control me. For the first time, I felt like maybe I had a choice. Maybe I could decide how to face this moment, how to take control of the story that had seemed to slip from my hands. The man finally spoke, softly, almost imperceptibly at first. His words were careful, deliberate, but they hit me with a force I didn't expect. He didn't comment on my torn dress. He didn't laugh. He didn't pity me. He said something that made my heart skip. "You're stronger than you realize." I blinked, my lips parted, but no sound came out. Stronger? Me? I barely felt like myself, embarrassed and exposed in front of everyone. But as I looked at him, I realized that maybe, just maybe, he saw something I had forgotten existed in me. A spark, a strength buried beneath years of struggle and humiliation. A resilience I had clung to in private, but never recognized in public. And then the room seemed to shift again. People who had been smirking, whispering, and pointing began to turn their attention elsewhere, subtly, almost instinctively. It was like his presence had a gravity that changed everything in the space. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't just about a dress. This wasn't just about humiliation. This was about recognition, about being seen when the world constantly tried to make you invisible. I could feel the adrenaline pumping through me. My mind raced with possibilities. Could this encounter really change anything? Could one man's attention, one person seeing me for who I was, alter the course of a day, a life, or even more? I didn't know the answer yet, but the thought sent shivers down my spine. The ordinary world I had known, the world of struggle, whispers, and quiet invisibility, was shifting, opening into something I couldn't have predicted. I took a shaky breath and realized I had a choice. I could let this moment define me, let the embarrassment swallow me whole, or I could step into the possibility it offered. The tension in my chest didn't disappear, but it transformed into something else. Anticipation, courage, and the faintest glimmer of hope. A chance to see what could happen if I dared to move forward, if I dared to trust even when my world had taught me not to. And then, just as I thought I might finally relax, something unexpected happened. He smiled. Not a small, polite smile, but a full, genuine smile that reached his eyes. It was disarming, impossible, and it made the entire room fade into the background once more. My heart pounded, my mind whirled, and I realized that this single moment, one that had begun with humiliation, fear, and exposure, was transforming into something I couldn't have imagined. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if this connection, this spark, would last, or if it would vanish as quickly as it appeared. But in that instant, I felt alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. Terrified, exhilarated, and completely aware that my story, my life, was pivoting into a new, uncharted path. One moment had turned everything upside down, and I was standing at the edge, unsure of what was coming, but ready to see it through. Could a single act of recognition, a single look, really change the course of a life? Could it truly make someone see the person beneath, at the struggles, the fears, and the failures? I didn't have the answer yet. All I knew was that something had shifted, irrevocably, and that my life would never be the same again. After that moment, I didn't know what to do with myself. I wanted to run, to hide, to escape the room entirely, but my feet stayed planted as if they had a mind of their own. The man, he didn't look away. He just stood there, calm, collected, and somehow completely aware of everything I was feeling. My heart raced, and every nerve in my body screamed that this was impossible. Why was he paying attention to me? Why now, when I felt so small, so exposed, so humiliated? The whispers didn't stop. They swirled around me like a storm, soft at first, then growing sharper, heavier, more relentless. I could hear the judgments, the incredulous comments, even the pity hidden behind polite smiles. Every word cut like a knife, but the moment I looked back at him, their power lessened. He wasn't just seeing me, he was understanding. And that understanding, it was dangerous in the best possible way. I tried to focus on steadying my breathing, but it felt impossible. My dress, torn and failing me at every seam, clung awkwardly, reminding me of everything I thought I couldn't fix. I wanted to hide, to shrink away, to pretend this day was nothing. But I couldn't. Something in me refused to disappear completely. Something small but fierce, whispering that maybe, just maybe, I had the right to stand here and exist without apology. Then it happened. The whispers crescendoed, a mocking, cruel symphony. And suddenly, someone bumped into me. Accidentally, maybe, but the sting was real. I stumbled, my torn dress snagging again, and my face burned with the deepest shame I had ever felt. I wanted to sink into the floor, to vanish entirely. But he stepped closer, shielding me in a way I didn't understand. Not aggressively, not boastfully, just calmly, purposefully, as if his presence alone could keep the world at bay. My mind spun. How could one man, one stranger, make me feel both terrified and safe at the same time? The contradictions were overwhelming. I felt helpless, embarrassed, and small, yet alive in ways I hadn't been for years. I realized that life's cruelty had a pattern. The world wanted me quiet, invisible, unseen. And yet, here he was, challenging every rule it had ever imposed on me. He made me realize, for the first time in a long time, that maybe my life didn't have to follow the script that everyone else had written. As the moments stretched, I could feel people noticing him noticing me. The glances, the whispers, they faltered. There was a shift, subtle but undeniable. The attention I had thought would crush me instead became a stage, a proving ground. I wasn't just a poor girl in a torn dress anymore. In some strange, unbelievable way, I was visible, seen, recognized, and for reasons I couldn't yet understand, someone powerful had chosen to see me. Not my mistakes, not my flaws, not my embarrassment, but me. My chest tightened. Could this really be happening? Could a single act, a single gaze, truly alter the direction of someone's day or their life? I wanted to believe it, but fear held me back. Life had taught me not to trust, not to hope, not to imagine miracles where none existed. Yet the intensity in his eyes, the quiet strength in his presence, forced me to reconsider. Maybe life was cruel, yes, but maybe it could also surprise you when you least expected it. Then came the moment that shifted everything. He smiled. A real smile. One that seemed to cut through every judgment, every whisper, every expectation. It wasn't a small, polite gesture. It was a smile that reached into my chest and tugged at something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, unshakable hope. I blinked, unsure if this was real, unsure if my mind was playing tricks on me. But I could feel it. Something extraordinary was happening. Something I had never dared to imagine. I sat up,
Aloud hard, my throat dry, and felt a strange mix of fear and anticipation. Could one moment truly be the turning point of everything? Could one glance, one smile, one act of recognition really change how the world saw me or how I saw myself? I didn't know the answer. All I knew was that my life, my story, had pivoted on a single instant, and nothing would ever feel ordinary again. And yet, the tension wasn't over. Even as I stood there, slightly steadier, slightly more aware of my own power, the room still buzzed with judgment. People hadn't forgotten me entirely, and the whispers, though quieter, still lingered. I realized then that the real test wasn't over. The humiliation, the struggle, the injustice. It wasn't something that vanished with a single moment of kindness. Life didn't give you victories that easily, and I knew I had to face it all, not run from it. But for the first time, I felt like I could. The strength wasn't loud or boastful. It was quiet, subtle, but undeniable. It grew inside me, a small flame flickering despite the storm around me. And I understood, in that moment, that the true turning point wasn't the smile or the attention or even the man himself. It was the realization that I could endure, that I could survive, that I could exist even in a world that tried to humiliate me at every turn. I took a deep breath, my fingers still clutching the torn fabric of my dress, and let the intensity of the moment wash over me. The room, the whispers, the embarrassment, they were all part of the story, but they didn't define me anymore. I felt a sense of clarity, a sense of purpose, and a strange, undeniable thrill. Something was coming, something I couldn't predict, but I knew I was ready to face it. And in that moment, as he continued to look at me with that impossible understanding, I realized something else too. Life could be cruel, yes, but it could also be miraculous. A single encounter, a single act, a single glance could alter the course of a life. And maybe, just maybe, the universe had chosen this moment, this humiliating, terrifying, unforgettable moment, to give me a chance I had never dared to hope for. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know how my story would unfold, or whether this encounter would last, or vanish as quickly as it appeared. All I knew was that my life had shifted in ways I could never have imagined, and that the next moments, whatever they held, would define me in ways I was just beginning to understand. I could feel my heart beating in my throat as the room seemed to close in around me. The whispers, the stares, the judgment, they had followed me like shadows all day, but now, in this moment, they felt heavier, sharper, impossible to ignore. My hands shook as I tried to steady myself, clutching the torn fabric of my dress, wishing I could disappear into nothingness. Every glance, every murmur, felt like a spotlight on my humiliation, and I couldn't breathe. I wanted to vanish, to erase myself from the world, to pretend none of this had ever happened. But then, he stepped forward. The man in the suit, calm and deliberate, moved closer. Not hurriedly, not aggressively, just with a steady confidence that made the chaos around him seem almost irrelevant. The room seemed to pause, the whispers quieting, as if everyone sensed what was about to happen. My pulse raced, my chest tightened, and I felt every nerve in my body alive with fear, anticipation, and a strange, thrilling hope I couldn't name. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at me, really looked at me, and it felt like he was seeing through everything. The embarrassment, the fear, the torn dress, the years of struggle I had carried silently. And then, slowly, he extended his hand, not in pity, not in judgment, but in a way that made my chest ache. I froze, unsure if I could accept it, unsure if this was real, unsure if I deserved it. But the fire inside me, courage I hadn't realized I still had, whispered to reach for it. When our hands touched, the room seemed to blur, the whispers faded. The pointing fingers melted into the background, and all I could feel was him. Calm, steady, and impossibly present. I felt like I was suspended between terror and exhilaration, every emotion magnified, every heartbeat echoing in my ears. How could one moment, one touch, feel like the end and the beginning of everything at once? And then he spoke. His voice was soft, deliberate, but it hit me harder than anything else that day. You're stronger than you realize. The words struck me like a shockwave. Stronger? Me? I barely felt capable of standing, let alone being strong. My mind screamed that this was impossible, that he couldn't possibly understand, that the world had already labeled me embarrassed, poor, powerless. And yet, somehow, he saw past all of that. Somehow, he recognized the part of me I had hidden even from myself. The spark, the courage, the resilience I had clung to in silence. I could feel the room shifting again. People who had been smirking, whispering, judging, began to glance away subtly, instinctively, as if the gravity of his presence had changed everything. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying and exhilarating. This wasn't just about the dress. It wasn't just about embarrassment. It was about being seen, truly seen. And the realization made my chest tighten in ways I couldn't describe. I wanted to run. I wanted to hide. But something stronger held me in place, something that had been inside me all along. The courage to face this moment, to endure the shame, to rise despite it. The man's steady gaze anchored me, gave me strength, and reminded me that humiliation could be transformed into opportunity, if only we dared to accept it. The whispers continued, but they were distant now, background noise in a world that had shifted. And then came the smile, not polite, not casual, but full, genuine, impossible to ignore. It reached his eyes and somehow reached mine, cutting through the fear, the shame, and the doubt. My breath caught, my hands trembled, and I felt a mixture of disbelief, awe, and a strange, thrilling hope that I couldn't name. Could a single moment, one glance, one touch, one word, really change the course of a life? Could it undo years of fear, embarrassment, and struggle? I wanted to believe it, but my mind raced with doubts. Life hadn't taught me to trust miracles. It had taught me to endure, to hide, to survive quietly. And yet, here I was, standing at the edge of something impossible, something extraordinary, something that defied everything I thought I knew about the world. I felt a strange, trembling exhilaration. Fear and hope collided inside me, every nerve alive with possibility. My torn dress, the whispers, the judgment, they were still there, but they no longer defined me. The world's cruelty hadn't disappeared, but for the first time, I realized it didn't have to control me either. And then, in that suspended moment, I understood something fundamental. The turning point had arrived, not because of him, but because of me. Because I had survived the shame, because I had stayed, even when my instincts screamed to flee, because I had chosen to exist fully in the face of humiliation. He didn't rush, didn't demand, didn't try to fix anything. He simply existed beside me, steady and calm, and that presence alone was transformative. I realized that the real shift wasn't external, it was internal. I had faced the worst of my fears, the sharpest edge of shame, and survived. And in surviving, I had begun to reclaim something I had lost long ago. My own sense of worth. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if this encounter would last, or if it would vanish as quickly as it appeared. All I knew was that something fundamental had changed. One moment, one glance, one act of recognition had shifted the course of everything, and I felt alive, terrified, exhilarated, and completely aware that my story, the story of Alec Rose, poor girl, torn dress, whispers, and shame, was pivoting into something I could never have imagined. The world could still be cruel, yes. Humiliation could still strike at any moment. But in that moment, I felt invincible in a way I had never known. And as I stood there, trembling but unbroken, I realized the truth. Life could be unfair. Life could be harsh. Life could humiliate you. But it could also surprise you in ways you had never dared to hope for. After that day, nothing felt the same. I walked out of that crowded hall, still clutching the torn dress, still feeling the weight of every whisper and stare. But something had shifted inside me. The humiliation hadn't vanished completely. The embarrassment still lingered like a shadow at the edges of my mind. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark. A quiet, fierce confidence that I hadn't known existed. The world could be cruel, the judgment harsh, and yet I had survived. I had endured. I had stood when I could have collapsed. The man in the suit, still a mystery, still someone from a world I had never imagined entering, had given me something that no dress, no compliment, no fleeting attention could have given. Recognition. He had seen me, not my failures, not my flaws, not the way the world tried to define me, but me, the real me, strong, resilient, capable, and worthy. And that recognition, that single act, changed something fundamental inside me. I thought about the millions of others who lived quietly, humbly, and invisibly, carrying burdens no one saw. People judged, whispered, ignored, and humiliated them every day. And yet, how little it would take to see them differently. One glance, one word, one moment of genuine attention could transform their world in ways unimaginable. I realized then that life's cruelty was only half the story. The other half was opportunity, empathy, and the chance to act when the world seemed indifferent. As I walked home that day, I felt stronger, braver, and more aware of my own worth. Every step was deliberate, every breath a reminder that I had faced shame and emerged intact. I didn't know what the future held, whether I would ever see him again, or whether this encounter would fade into memory. But I knew one thing: I had changed. The embarrassment, the humiliation, and the whispers no longer controlled me. I had taken back the power that the world had tried to steal. It wasn't just about me. It was a reminder that every person who feels invisible, every person who faces judgment, and every person crushed by life's unfairness deserves to be seen. Recognition, even small, can ignite courage, hope, and change. One act of empathy can alter the course of a life, and perhaps even ripple outward to touch countless others. It made me wonder, how many lives go unnoticed every day simply because no one pauses to see the truth? How many moments of hope are lost because people look away? I often replay that day in my mind. The torn dress, the whispers, the fear, and then the extraordinary gaze that reminded me of my worth. Life didn't suddenly become easy. The world didn't change overnight. But I changed. I realized that the power to survive, to endure, and to rise above humiliation lives inside all of us, even when the world tries to convince us otherwise. And so, I carry that day with me. I carry the memory of fear and embarrassment, but also the memory of hope, courage, and the reminder that life can surprise us in ways we never imagine. Sometimes, the smallest disasters, the most humiliating moments hold the greatest lessons. They test us, but they also reveal the strength we never knew we had. As I think back, I ask myself, and I ask anyone listening, how often do we overlook someone's struggle? How often do we fail to see the courage hidden beneath the fear, the resilience beneath the silence, and the hope buried under the weight of judgment? Could a simple act, one glance, one word, one moment of recognition, truly change someone's life? I believe it can. I know it can. Life is unpredictable. It can humiliate you, crush you, and make you feel invisible. But it can also surprise you, uplift you, and remind you of your worth when you least expect it. The choice is always ours: to notice, to act, to recognize the humanity in someone else. And maybe, just maybe, that recognition can transform not only their world, but ours as well. I am Alec Rose. I was once the girl in a torn dress, trembling under the weight of whispers and stares. But I am also the girl who survived, who rose, who discovered that even in the darkest moments, there is hope, strength, and the possibility of something extraordinary. And my story, my ordinary turned unbelievable story, is a reminder that no one is truly invisible and no one's courage is wasted, even when the world seems to ignore it.